thank you so much for being here. My name is Vanessa Lombardo, and I am the Training and Learning Manager here at Benetech. And I'm so excited to have Bruce Alter, Emily Cooper, and Jackie Knight here with us today to talk about implementing Bookshare at your school. We're going to talk about best practices around creating buy-in at your school, engaging students with Bookshare, and leveraging Bookshare with other educators. But before we get started, just two quick housekeeping things. We will have some discussion time at the end. So as we're talking, please put your questions in the QA box of the chat, and we will hopefully get to a few of them. And closed captioning is available, so please click on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen to enable those. So again, thank you for being here. I'm really excited for this discussion. So panelists, let's start off just by introducing yourselves, giving us a little bit of your background and where you work. So Emily, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, go ahead.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, I'm Emily Cooper, and I'm an assistive technology specialist, a speech language pathologist as well. And I work in San Diego Unified School District. We're a large urban district with 226 schools. We've got a team of 5 speech pathologists and 1 occupational therapist that service the students in our large district.
Awesome, great. Thanks so much for being here. Bruce, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, I'm Bruce Alter. I'm a physical therapist and assistive technology consultant for 2 different school districts in Oregon, Tigard-Tualatin and Woodburn. In addition, I'm in a relatively unique position in that I have dyslexia. So in addition to being the primary contact for Bookshare in our districts, I'm also a Bookshare member and utilize it myself.
Great, and Jackie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jackie Knight. I am an assistive technology specialist for Glendale Unified School District in Southern California. We are a relatively large school district, and we have 4 high schools. And in addition, there are only 2 assistive technology specialists in the district. So I also help support SELPA when needed. So it's a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Well, that is great. So we have a few different types of districts and certainly different places. So that is great. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, how is Bookshare set up in your district, right? So who runs the account? How do teachers and students get access? Kind of that daily, actually utilizing it and setting it up for success. So Bruce, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. So regardless of how you feel about Amazon, one of the things they put out in the business world is the idea of frictionless. And they must be frictionless because they frictionlessly take a lot of my money all the time. And I tried to use that as a model for Bookshare. So we looked for every possible barrier to students being both identified, signed up, and getting content. What we have in my districts now is there is a student data privacy consortium, and we have an agreement, or we did through that with Bookshare, which meant like any of the software we use in the district where you have a privacy agreement, I can sign up a student who qualifies without having to get an individual permission form from their parent to share their information. So that removed a huge barrier. In addition, when we provide material for students, we do it through Google Drive. All of our students have a Google account, even down to 1st grade. And we push the content through the Google Drive account, either to their, when they access it either on their Chromebook or on their iPad. We have a subscription to Read and Write for Google, so that provides an EPUB reader for our Chromebook students. And we had been using VoiceStream Reader until they went to a subscription model. And if people want to hear me rant, I'll talk about that. But we're using Bookshare Reader now instead. So what we've tried to do is make it as frictionless as possible. Last thing I'm going to say that is the thing I'm implementing now is we've coordinated with the curriculum committee. And we're going through the curriculum as it comes out and checking to see if Bookshare has it in its holdings. And if it doesn't, we're turning in requests to add it. the idea eventually is I'd like to have reading lists. So if we know a student is in 4th grade math, we just push all the books that are being used for 4th grade math. So we don't even have to wait for requests to come in, because that's the current barrier.
All right, that is great. And like you said, kind of systemically looking at, all the different pain points and figuring out what will work with your district. So that is great. Jackie, how about you? How do you have it set up at your district? And tell us a little bit about some of those specific pieces.
Sure. So in our district, students qualify for Bookshare due to their access needs, just like most people. I would say one of the things that is really great is the Bookshare reader has really become so fluid and easy to use through Chrome. All of our students have Chromebooks. That was one of the lemonade aspects of COVID, right? Is that all of our students got tech in their hands. So it was no longer a battle on providing technology, and the students don't feel different anymore because all of their friends have Chromebooks as well. So they're all so those who have Bookshare are using it on the Chromebook through the Chrome reader. And when we're looking at student use, I actually have grade level and school-based lists. So I'm the person that has access to the SELPA account, because we want to make sure that as students get into larger grades, they from kinder to first, et cetera, as they grow up and they change schools and they change case managers and teachers, they don't get lost in the shuffle. So I'm overseeing all of that and changing grade levels as we go through, and then adding reading lists based on what school they're at and what grade they're at. So it's a little bit of work for me, but it is so well worth it when I see students accessing reading.
All right, great, wonderful. And Emily, talk to us a little bit about your district and how things are set up and structured for students to access Bookshare.
I'm going to go ahead and second the ease with which we can sign up students these days. So our district's been associated with Bookshare for years and years. And back in the day, it required faxing, which, the process was a lot more labor intensive. So the ease with which we can sign up our students is amazing. So we do it a couple different ways. Our department is the assistive technology specialist, accept referrals so somebody might have some concerns about a student, and Bookshare might get recommended or assigned that way. But we've really worked on building capacity at the site level. So really having centralized trainings and getting ed specialists and site staff members trained to Bookshare so that they can, in every IEP, when they're considering that, does my student require assistive technology question as part of the IEP process, they'll say, oh, wait, a digital text reader, what goes along with that? Let's get them access to Bookshare. So we have training materials that are posted on our sites, and we as the assistive technology specialists really work to build that capacity and say, listen, there's nothing special about me. You can get signed up as a sponsor, and you know your students best, and if you determine that they do in fact qualify, here's how easy it is to sign them up. And one of the ways we've done that is create a big cache of reading lists for elementary leisure, elementary literature. So once a teacher determines that a student is eligible, they can sign them up and then automatically, like, here you go, here's 100 books immediately. So that's kind of our direction that we've gone. Oh, and our district also has a district-wide access to read and write for Google Chrome. So again, it kind of goes with it. So when we're saying, oh, this student is definitely going to benefit from a text reader, again, let's get access to Bookshare so we can really give them access to lots more digital materials that they can access in the way that suits their needs best.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's really great. I love what you said about giving the teachers, the agency, the access, right? Getting them signed up as a sponsor, right? So in Bookshare world, we call teachers educators, sponsors. And so, as you said, they can add students, they can look for the books, they can assign the books, they can do a lot of different things. And just as we want students to have agency and advocacy and be able to, move forward, we want the same thing for the teachers, and the educators that are working with the students.
And they know their kids really well. Like they'll know this kid's really into
Yes.
motorcycles, or he's into bugs, like whatever their thing is to kind of help with the hook, which I don't have. And we have about 450 sponsors signed up. So it's a big group of them. But like I said, they know their kids best. They know what their little interests are. So they're really good, candidates for getting those kids kind of hooked into reading.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really, really great. So important. So again, a few different ways of setting it up, depending obviously on the district and the needs of the teachers, the students, and that kind of all those different things. So that's great. So now I want to get a little, I shouldn't say just specific in regard to how do your students actually access the books? So Jackie, I'll toss it to you first. You mentioned Chromebooks, of course, but really getting into the specific devices, the reading tools, how do you customize the settings with them, and really trying to, to figure out what's the best way, for the students to access the book. So Jackie, could you talk a little bit about how you do things in your district?
Sure. So I actually sit. So again, they're accessing it through the Chrome, through Bookshare Reader on Chrome. That would be, I would say, of our Bookshare users, the majority. Some of them are using iPads, but the ease of use on the Chrome books combined with all the other tools and activities they have to do in classes, it just makes the most amount of sense to have on Chromebooks most of the time. And I spent a lot of time looking at settings. I will actually sit with a student as part of my assessment with them when I'm doing the UPAR. I'll do a UPAR with them, and then I'll spend time and I'll actually look at what background color, what font size, what voice. We will go through it together, because then that can become part of my recommendations when I present my report. But it's also incredibly important for everybody that works with the student to know what works best for that student. And I think it's really important that all teachers, gen ed, special ed, because again, all of our students who have IEPs, they are gen ed first. So we want to make sure that everybody has that background information so that the student doesn't have to be the one, especially in the beginning, because it's very hard in the beginning for our students to advocate. Eventually, we teach them how to, and they learn how to with support and modeling and scaffolding. But it's not on the onus of the student. It's on the onus of the adults. And so I do spend time with them, showing them where the settings are, working on that, and then teaching them, right? I give them a little sheet of paper or, just a little something that they can listen to on Google about what it is that they need so they can practice and as part of their scaffolding. I also, I follow up with the teachers and make sure that the students are getting their needs met that way. We have a lot of textbooks that are already digital, right? And the students can listen to them. The problem is that you can't change the pitch or the voice or the speed of those online textbooks. So I'll often tell the student, go back to Bookshare and find the textbook so you can slow down the rate of reading so that you can hear it, so that you can comprehend it and you can take notes on it. So I do, I'm an AT specialist and I'm a service provider. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I also train parents. I think parents are incredibly valuable. And one of the things I didn't mention in the last question was that I highly encourage and repeatedly encourage parents to get individual accounts, because that, again, reading needs to happen all the time. It doesn't just happen at school. Good readers read all the time. And so we want parents to be able to say, hey, we went to the library and the librarian recommended this book. We're going to throw it on Bookshare. Or we saw on Bookshare's list some highly recommended YA novels. We're going to put it on Bookshare. We're all going to work on this together as a family to help our child become a reader. And then also, it means that they're not dependent on a teacher to place the book, right? It's Thursday night, it's Friday night or Sunday night, and the student has homework and the student forgot, right?
Yep.
then the student automatically can access it. So I do a lot of training with parents as well. So there's student training, teacher training, and parent training. So that's sort of my nitty gritty,
Mhm.
and getting into the really sitting with the student and finding out their customizations. I hope that
Mhm.
answered your question.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And the thing about the individual memberships, and I'm just going to stick a link in here, one of our help articles, because we talk about the individual memberships too, and how a student can have both, right? They can have that organizational
Mhm.
membership and the individual, you can link them. But the other thing about the individual membership is that it does follow the student, right? So when they graduate K-12 and they go into whatever, whether it's post-secondary work, something else, if they really value that membership, then they are able to continue to use it. And so, we're talking all the time about lifelong readers and lifelong learners and making sure that we're giving access. That is really the crux of Bookshare, right? Is
Right,
giving access to students. So I'm
right.
really glad that you mentioned that about the individual memberships as well. So that's great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bruce, if you wouldn't mind, just talking a little bit again in specific, what kind of devices, reading tools, setting things up for the student, things like that. How do you do it in your district?
Sure. And actually, I wanted to go back to the previous question also, because I left it out because we've been doing it so long, I forgot. One of the we have two ways we identify students, maybe three if you include the referred. Again, we wanted to get as many students identified as possible. Once a year, we pull a listing of all the students in special education who have SLD as an eligibility criteria and reading checked as an area of concern. And we make memberships for them. And since we have a privacy agreement, again, we can just do that. We also use the UPAR to identify students on a more ad hoc basis.
Mm-hmm.
So my districts use a mix of iPads and Chromebooks. Tiger uses iPads up through 8th grade and then switches to Chrome. Woodburn is in transition, but K through 2, maybe K through 4 is going to be next year, and then Chromebook from that point on. So we've been doing this for a while, and at the time when we needed an EPUB reading tool for Chrome, Read and Write for Google, which also has a lot of other tools to support writing. Figure all your kids who have difficulty with, and I'll speak for myself too, all your kids who have difficulty with reading are going to have difficulty with writing, or certainly the vast majority of them. So on Chrome, that provides the support we need. Until very recently, I was an early adopter of VoiceStream Reader. I actually talked to the developer on the phone, and he had no idea what he had created. I told him it was the greatest thing for kids with and people like me with reading problems ever. He had designed VoiceStream for busy executives so they could listen to stuff in their car, but that is over with now because Winston sold the company and the new developer has made it subscription, and I'll stop saying that. So we're transitioning to Bookshare Reader, which is, and I'll just be frank, it's not that mature a product yet. The advantage to VoiceStream is it also had a scan feature built in. So I could teach a student or an adult one app, and not only, because you have to think globally. I know this is a Bookshare seminar, but the vast majority of material that a student's going to run into during the day is either probably teacher generated, and that's what happens in my districts. So I can get the textbook for them, but if a teacher hands a student a worksheet, what happens then? So having tools so a student can do text to speech even when they're handed a piece of paper, which shouldn't happen, but happens more frequently than I would like it to. So I'm hoping as the Bookshare Reader matures that we'll see some additional features. Right now, I'm having to use 2 or 3 apps on iOS to cover the same thing that VoiceStream did. So that's how we do it across the 2 platforms.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Bruce, certainly looking at, the Bookshare Reader and all the Bookshare tools at the end today, the very last session is around some of those upcoming features. But the thing that I always like to mention, and Bruce heard me say this in the previous session, but we do work with lots of different AT partners and companies and tech organizations, software developers. We want to partner because we want to provide Bookshare in a way that works for individuals to read. So if they prefer reading it on a phone or prefer reading on an iPad or another type of tablet or whatever device it might be, Bookshare, we want to give access to the books, but the tools, certainly are for, for individuals to choose. So Bookshare has their suite of tools, but obviously, as Bruce mentioned, there's lots of different ways, and that's part of this, asking these questions, in each district. And I'm sure between the three of you, there's still many, many more that we won't even cover today. But that's really, really great. And the other thing, as Bruce and some of the other team here has done, other champions, we always want to hear about what those improvements could be, right? What is missing? How might we add them into the roadmap and things like that? So, we are never done. I would say we are always looking to add those things. So that is great. Thank you so much, Bruce. I really appreciate all that, all the insight. And then Emily, talk, if you would, again, wouldn't mind talking a little in specific, regarding the devices, the tools and things like that.
So not a lot to add. All the things that my fellow panelists just kind of went over. We are Chrome based, so it's the majority of the materials are through Chrome, and we have read and write for Google Chrome, so they're reading it that way. And like Bruce said, it's nice. We're already training them to read and write, so they're typically using that text reader within when they're accessing their Bookshare books. And like we said, the materials are so much more accessible, and these kids, they don't stand out. Back in the day when we didn't have all these Chromebooks accessible, it just wasn't available. It wasn't one-to-one. We'd go out and you get the one kid in the class that qualified or went through the assessment process, an iPad, and they just don't blend in. I remember a kid I worked with years ago, and his friend, I was bringing in an iPad, which was a big deal. Maybe this is 7 years ago. And his friend is like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool. You get an iPad." And he said, "Well, it'd be cooler if I could read." But okay. But he was the one, everybody just saw that tablet, and he stands out a little bit. Whereas now it is so seamless and it's built in, and lots of kids are using these materials. So that's been really fun to see. Mm-hmm. And just the expanded adaptation of all these accessibility tools. It's amazing, including Bookshare.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful. All right. So now moving on from there, right? Moving on from the devices, how we set it up. And now, we know that students have to qualify for Bookshare, right? We talked again about this a little bit in the previous session, but the student, Bookshare operates under the copyright law, so not IDEA or any other education law. We're working directly with the publishers, and so it operates under the copyright law and an exemption, that provides this text to, or access to the text, to individuals who qualify. So Bruce, if you wouldn't mind starting, how do you identify a student that qualifies for Bookshare? So that way, again, the appropriate students are getting the support.
So I spent last summer, when I wasn't working on a bunch of iPads, I spent last summer in Woodburn qualifying 300 kids during the summer by pulling the list I described earlier. So that meant that those kids had accounts ready and waiting for them when they started, and it was based on, they met the eligibility criteria for Bookshare because they met the eligibility criteria as learning disabled, with reading being an area of concern. The tool we've been using the most recently is the UPAR, Universal Protocol for Accommodations in Reading, and I'd highly recommend that tool for a number of reasons. First, it does a great job of showing the differential between auditory and visual reading. One example I had recently was a student who was a move-in, who was an 8th grader who read at a 2nd grade level, but when provided with audio support, read at an 8th grade level. It was a little maddening because we got him all set up and he moved back to his home district where he got none of those supports, but still the proof was he was able to read 8th grade level books as long as he had audio support for them. The other aspect to the UPAR is it's super easy to explain to parents, and it's easy to explain to teachers. You'll still find a reluctance among teachers saying that's not really reading. Well, they're listening to it, they're not really reading. So you can get into a discussion of that, or you can say, well, look, they're at grade level. when they can listen to it, and they're not even at a first grade level when they're struggling with it. What's the best way to get the information in them so we can kind of pivot and avoid the whole discussion as to what is really reading. So that's been a really good tool, like I said, not just for identification, but for education. You show someone the graph from a UPAR and they see the colored bars and they see how well the student's doing. And I started with the paper version. The electronic version is pretty effortless. It does all that documentation for you. And I love that comment. Not everyone has to read with their eyes. I mentioned in the, I mean, I have dyslexia. So yes, that's really a good thing to say. Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely, Bruce. And I guess because there are obviously a few questions about UPAR, when you're, I guess maybe could you expand a little bit on it? It's a Don Johnston, tool, but maybe how did you come to understand how to use it, and maybe some of the intricacies? Because I think this could be a really powerful tool. So could you explain it a little more in depth, briefly?
I was just looking at my share screen button, but I'm not going to do that because it would take me time to pull up the materials, but it'd be better than me waving my hands. Okay, so the UPAR was first, it was Denise DaCosta who generated it. Am I remembering correctly? I always get her name screwed up. And she made a free paper version, which I don't know if it's still available on the Don Johnston website or not, but it was paper and pencil. And well, here's what happens with let me give you the current UPAR, because the current one is a lot better than the paper one. In the current UPAR, the experience is you sign up a student for it, they go to a computer or iPad, Chromebook, they log in using the information, they're asked to put in their grade level, and then they listen to an essay and they answer comprehension questions. And depending on how that goes, they may listen to another one that's at a different level and answer comprehension questions. And at some point, they will do a self-reading where there isn't audio support and do comprehension questions. And the computer program itself, they've really made significant improvements. It captures what the student's comprehension is, and you can also see how long they've spent on it. So you can tell if it's pretty enlightening to see how long, when they don't have audio support, a student may struggle to try to get through some of the questions. And what you end up with is a very clear-cut indication whether someone has better comprehension and at a higher grade level, or what grade level they have comprehension at, with audio versus visual reading. The old paper one, they would do the audio part at the end when the student was exhausted. So I think they made a significant improvement, and there's also many fewer essays. So what I'm finding with the new computer version is it captures information better. It's a subscription model by Don Johnston. Give them a difficult time about it because they want you to license it per building, as if, I mean, we're not in the age of special schools where you have one school with all the kids that can't read in one building. I'll tell you, I hope there's no Don Johnston people here. I licensed it to the admin building. I licensed it to a single, I don't know if they'll let me get away with that again. I licensed it to a single building because I'm in the admin building and I'm administering it. So we only paid a site license for a single building instead of 13 or 14 individual buildings, which would have been cost prohibitive. So you might try that trick as well. And it's a yearly subscription. We're on our second year, I think, in both my districts. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I did put a link into there. So if anybody has further, questions about that, as again, one way, to qualify or at least identify, the students. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bruce. I appreciate it. Emily, how do you do it in your district? How are you identifying, what students will qualify for Bookshare and then add them onto the accounts?
So we, if students get specific referrals to our department, I sometimes go out in our kind of outdated expert model where I go out and say, oh, wow, yes, you, and I can run through some tools and a formalized assessment, but we really are pushing a more centralized process where they do look at that eligibility criteria through through the IEP process, and we have reading it's checked off as an area of need. So we're really trying to push out as many as possible, and not slow it down through a more thorough assessment process, honestly. So those do get done as well upon specific requests, but then we also have it's the responsibility of the sponsors to identify which of their students qualify for Bookshare.
Absolutely. So right, so they're referring the student and then going from there. And really, that competent authority, we talked about this a little bit, in the last session, that is the person who's working with the student, right? Emily, you mentioned this before, right? That you want to build capacity because the teachers know the students, obviously, the educators, teachers, the team that is working with them. And so, by giving them, that obviously, helps in this whole process to identify them. Great. All right, thank you so much. And Jackie, in terms of, identifying students who qualifies and adding them in.
So we actually, in regards to the qualification aspect, we have a combination of both. One is through like a formal AT assessment referral that can come through. But also, we also have students with 504s, and I don't want us to forget that students with 504s also qualify for Bookshare if they have a disability that allows that impedes their access to print. And so please don't forget your 504 students. 504 is a non-funded mandatory thing, and I always love how it's super non-funded. But, so sometimes I'll have teachers, they'll just call me up or they'll shoot me an email and they'll say, hey, I have this student, what do you think? And I'm like, well, let's talk about it. And sometimes I'll do a formal assessment, and sometimes I'll base it off of the recommendation of the teacher. It sort of just depends on who the student is, because we also have to remember that it's not just a learning disability we also have students who are visually impaired. Right? And we also have students who have physical impairments who qualify. So if I have a student with CP who's having difficulty turning the pages, I don't need to assess them. Do you know what I'm saying? So we have to look at who the student is and what the referral reason is for the student. Sometimes we have to get really into that nitty gritty, and other times we don't. And so there's a flexibility in regards to it. So I've got this combination thing going, and maybe I could use more hands on deck, but it's working for me right now.
No, absolutely. And I think, right, these case by case, just looking at the student and really understanding what's going on, right? What are the needs? Bookshare being one accommodation, right? And making sure that they have access, students who are struggling to read standard print, have access. So that's really, really great to hear how you're doing it in your district. Awesome.
I want to add something.
Sure.
And that is, our teachers want students to learn to read, but often that may present, barrier is the wrong word, and let me try to approach this correctly. So yes, many of our students will develop some facility at reading, but in the meantime, all their classmates are moving ahead of them with content. And what I try to explain to the teachers is, and because I've learned by mistakes, by the teacher thinking I'm saying this kid shouldn't be taught to read, which is not at all what I'm saying. So I've modified how I approach it. But while you're working with the student in helping them learn to read, they need to have the same content availability as their classmates. So please continue to work with them on phonics and letter sounds, etc. But in the meantime, they can use audio support so that they will keep up with their classmates. And what I find incredibly painful is kids that are pulled out who are in 6th or 7th grade for rudimentary reading instruction, who, when we do the UPAR, we find maybe they're not at grade level because they've missed so much content, but maybe they're at a 4th grade level when they have audio support. So for those of you who work in K through 12, find a way to very gently help the teachers understand that you're not in opposition to them continuing to work with reading, but the student needs to have access to the content in the way that makes the most sense for them.
Bruce,
thanks for letting me say that.
Bruce, I just want to add, and I raised my hand because I think it's so incredibly, what you're saying is so incredibly important. I've also found that by the time the students are in high school, if they are still struggling to read, they cannot access their textbooks. They cannot access their literary books. They can't access their art books. Do you know what I'm saying? They're really,
or the PE handouts,
or the PE handouts,
Right.
or I mean, because there is reading in everything at that secondary level. And so what we're doing is we're setting up those students to fail and drop out or to act out, right? And so then we have behavioral issues. I can't even count the number of students that I've worked with the secondary level, 6th grade on, who had behavioral issues as a way of escaping reading, right? And so we have to remind our secondary teachers, these students may not have learned to read. You know, we've got students in our district who come from all over the world. And students with disabilities in some countries in the world are not allowed to go to school. It's just not an option for them. And so we have to remember some of these students have had very little school access. And if they have a disability on top of being an English learner, it makes it even harder for them. So I'm getting all the hearts. Thank you. I'm very passionate about this. So please, like, make sure your secondary teachers are on board, because I just hate it when I have a student who is reading at the 3rd grade level, but they're in the 11th grade and the teachers aren't giving them access.
I'm going to validate what you said from a totally different experience. And so I'm a physical therapist, and I used to be the physical therapist for a juvenile prison in Oregon. And of course, they have a high school there because the kids are high school age. And I remember, and this is before I was doing assistive tech, but we were having issues. And I remember one of the teachers pulled records and he said 90% of the students in this class can't read above a 3rd grade level. So now causation, I don't know, but almost every single kid in this prison couldn't read at grade level.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I've talked to other people and they validate that number. And that's exactly what happens. I have a presentation I do about a kid who was on his way to prison, and we got him set up with audio support. He's turned into a productive member of society, he's married, has his own business, etc. I've gotten to see that play out.
And I was going to piggyback on that to also say, not only do they don't necessarily have the skills, they themselves, the students always say, I hate reading. The second I bring up a book, they're like, nope, hate it, don't like it. Well, of course they hate it, because it's been, if somebody asked me to parallel park all day long, you know, one of my most difficult things to do, I'd be like, no, thanks. So we're asking with these kids, we have to kind of break down that barrier as well. If they're like, I don't like it, I'm like, really? Let me just start a book for you. And that's the way I'm like, okay. And also if I ask them like, what kind of books do you read? A lot of times they'll go back to their easy read, you know, something that's not even remotely close to grade level. So it's kind of a balance there. You got to hook the kids and say, you know what, it is fun. We're going to bypass this barrier of yours to get that information in. So I think that's another important thing that we have to, the kids just shut down. Go ahead,
And
Jen.
getting the parents on board and the teachers on board, that training and that coaching with them is so important, because I remember having parents who would be like, my child's in 10th grade. I don't want him reading books about animals. That's not his maturity level. And I kept having to, you know, bring the dad around saying, but that's his reading level and that's what he enjoys. So let's let him enjoy his book while we push forward. The other thing I want to say is there's a lot of depression related to and mental health issues that end up coming from from not being able to access reading. So what we're also doing is helping students to move through their, with their emotional well-being, which is incredibly important. If you're depressed, you're not learning, right? And so, anyways, I just wanted to add that too.
No, absolutely. There's so many pieces to this. It's just like so many things in life, right? That we're talking about this thing, but it's really this thing. You know, you're talking about something so targeted, but it has all these different other implications. And again, utilizing Bookshare as a way to access and not letting students get left behind, because that is, again, what we see, often as well. So giving them access to that content is so important. And Jackie, you did just touch on this and you talked about training, but building buy-in, right? So kind of shifting into talking about, okay, so now we have them set up, we're using it on a device, we set it up for them, the settings, all those things. That's all great. They're identified. Wonderful. So now, right, how do we build that buy-in, right, with other educators, teams, taking on using a new tool, like Bookshare, universal access. So talk a little more about some of that aspect.
So I think the buy-in comes from the teachers observing the students actually doing what they're supposed to do. So like the veteran teachers that I've worked with a long time, they have buy-in, they know it works, right? So, but it's oftentimes, those teachers are often my special education teachers. And the general education teachers, that's usually who it's a little harder to get them to buy in. So again, it's just training and practice and meeting with them and checking in with them. I do a lot of check-ins, and I have an assistant who goes in and works with kids and works with the adults who are working with the kids. So and then we work with the parents as well. It really is, sometimes kids go to it right away, right? Other times it takes effort, and they'll make every excuse on earth. I don't like the voice. I don't like this. I don't like that. But I'm like, but do you like the grade you got? Right. So also getting the OT on board, getting the counselor on board, getting everybody who is on the IEP team on board can make a difference as well. So we do a lot of training across the district and reaching out.
The best thing about when districts went one-to-one is I had kids become more comfortable using the technology they needed. And one of the big pushes I do for UDL, though I don't use the verbiage very much with teachers, is any kid in the class could use this to listen to the book. I'm not talking about Bookshare, I'm talking about a screen reader and the electronic textbooks. But that's my way of getting more of the kids to wear earbuds. So the student who needs to wear earbuds will do it, because when you have a disability, I mean, again, I can relate to it in school. You're kind of like a sheep, and you don't want to attract the wolves' attention, so you don't want to look different. And that means that kids will be reluctant to use the technology they require. But the more other students, the more UDL that is in the classroom, the more likely everyone is to, well, he's making a choice. He's got a bigger font and he has a different color screen and she's listening to it, then everyone will utilize, and the kids who need it, where it isn't optional, are more likely to use it.
When I'm incorporating with my teachers as well, because a lot of times the last thing our teachers want is more work. And a lot of times they see me come in, they're like, when I see you, I just see more work. I got to sign somebody up for something. I have to have an addendum to the IEP, a supplemental IEP. So I think that I try to get into the ground floor, like, listen, I want you, teacher, to be able to present your materials, and I'm going to provide you the tools that they will become accessible to all the students. So not only is it, it'll take a little bit of setting up, but then ideally you'll be able to have your materials, which dreamily are so readily or so much more accessible ever since COVID, because a lot of the materials are digital, which that used to be a whole nother can of worms. But I think getting the buy-in from teachers that way, that they are overworked, they have a lot to do, they see this as one more thing to do. But if we can kind of get them get buy-in from them, like, oops, just do this one little thing, and then suddenly kids evolved that needs access their materials in different ways.
Emily, I just want to add that Bookshare has so many resources, online resources for people who are learning to use the system. It's really fantastic, because anytime I forget how to do something or I want to show someone how to do something, I don't have to make it myself. I'm so tired of making videos. I love that I don't have to make any Bookshare videos because they're all right there. Yes. And thanks, Vanessa, for posting that. If you guys haven't had a chance to look at the Learning Center, please do, because there's a lot of really, really resources there.
We just linked that right from our website. We used to create materials too. They're like, it's already been done. So let's not reinvent the wheel.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Emily, I wanted you to ask, or maybe if you could add a little more, you talked about training before, right? And so could you talk a little bit about how you do training? Is it like a professional development day? Is it you're working with a smaller group, or you're going site to site? Would you talk a little more about that?
So all of those, I do lots of site-based trainings. We did a lot when we first got access to Read and Write for Google Chrome. We reached a lot, or I mean, like thousands of our teachers. And I would wrap to Read and Write for Google Chrome and kind of UDL principles and how to incorporate that into their classrooms. And then Bookshare would come as an aside for that. It was kind of like a mention, like a more sidebar mention to some of those larger trainings. But we have centralized trainings that our department puts out, the assistive technology department, and then we also provide direct trainings based on individual referrals and site. So I have principals that request, can you come and do a presentation for everybody on site? So it's a combination.
Gotcha. No, that's great. And then Bruce, anything else, to add in terms of building in capacity, buy-in from other educators, the team, parents, other pieces, just to add that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, we've had one of my districts, we've been involved in a multi-year project with CAST on an AIM cohort. And so we've gotten involved with the curriculum committee, which is a whole nother piece, but an essential one. What I'm going to say is my own personal growth is I was really focused on individual students or devices or whatever. And now I'm thinking organizational and systemic, which is completely contrary to how I used to be. But what I'm trying to do now is have policies in place in a district so it isn't the personality of individuals like me that drive the process. When you have the board adopt an accessibility policy that requires the curriculum they get to meet not just minimum, but the standards that will help most of our students, that's a really big deal. So what I would say is if you have the bandwidth or if someone on your team can get involved with the curriculum selection committees, at least on a cursory level, so maybe when they get to the final four, you can come in and do a review of the accessibility of the curriculum and make the team aware of the issues. That will pay off big time when you don't have to try to find an alternative or scramble because the textbook is inaccessible to certain students.
Yeah, we actually encountered an issue prior to when I first started working at my district. This is only my 8th year at my district, and they had approved a science textbook that was not accessible for the visually impaired. Everything was video based, very, very video based, and we have a student who's visually impaired and qualifies for assistive technology, but could not access anything because of her visual impairment. And it was, I think after that occurred, they now, because it was quite the issue, they now do a better job at looking at that. But yeah, Bruce, you are right on point.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Digital does not equal accessible. Correct. Correct.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. And such an important point to bring up. So we just have a couple minutes here. And so I guess just, in kind of in ending our time, what are some hurdles you've encountered implementing Bookshare? How have you gotten around them? I guess essentially like advice, right, for anyone on this call, thinking about implementing Bookshare. So maybe Bruce, if you wouldn't mind starting, what are some ways, to really get at implementing it, for students?
You need to get teacher buy-in, and you need it's pretty much what we've been talking about. So you need teacher buy-in, parent buy-in, and student buy-in. You need to create an environment where the student is comfortable using the technology. So I'm going to be repeating myself somewhat, is comfortable using the technology that they need. The difference between assistive technology and educational technology is our students in SPED need that technology. It's not optional for them. You need teachers who have seen success because they're your best advocates. They're the ones that talk to their colleagues and say, hey, this worked with my students. You should contact Bruce, or you should contact your assistive tech people and get this other student in the same program. And you need to help parents understand that what their child needs for success. And then maybe finally, the student needs to be able to advocate. And I'm a little cautious about this. I don't think figure your typical gen ed grade school student is not going down to the bookstore and picking out their textbook, right? It's handed to them. So it should be the same for our grade school kids. They shouldn't have to be the ones who stand up in class and take a picture of their document. That means something's broken there. The teacher needs to understand to provide it in a digital format. However, middle school and high school, they need to be good self-advocates so that they're ready for either the workplace or college, and they can talk about what they require to be successful in a cogent way that's not going to be off-putting.
Absolutely. Emily, anything to follow up there in our last couple minutes here?
I think the reading list, just making it as simple as possible. This isn't hard. Within minutes, your student can have access to this, so a large number of digital books, and then you can kind of hone in on interest, and those individual accounts I think is really important as well, so that it does carry over.
Absolutely. And Jackie, other thoughts?
The only thing I want to add is please don't forget your students with physical limitations who have complex bodies that cannot physically access books. We often think about Bookshare for students who are visually impaired or who have learning disabilities in the area of reading. But we really, really do have students who can learn to read and who can comprehend. They just haven't been given the accessibility access. That barrier has not been brought down. Yeah, Bruce, also your AAC users, 100%. I apologize for my doggy. We are working on a program right now at a school exactly for that. We're working on literacy skills for students who are AAC users, because reading comes in different forms. And so we need to make sure that our students who have complex communication, complex bodies are able to access their literature, and that, you know what, they might be able to get high school diplomas too, right? Just because they're an AAC user doesn't mean that they can't get a high school diploma. You say that, Vanessa, but a lot of people don't.
I know, don't
you know, and so we always want to make sure that that bar is there for our students that they can access, and it starts when they're little. So start them now, start them in preschool, start them in kindergarten, getting them reading in the way that they can.
Absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that is an awesome way to end. Again, I want to thank you three so much. We really, really appreciate your time.